take the North and never give it back.
So that's a good pick. You get the corner. I got to go bold, right? I got to go bold for this.
Yeah, she's got some nice.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron. Make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube and join us in our quest for 5,000 subscribers before the NFL draft. And if you haven't already, download the show everywhere you get your podcast. Rate 5 stars, and you'll be in the entry for a Darnell Wright jersey. We are so close to our 58 5-star reviews out there on Apple Podcasts. And also, if you haven't already, click the link down below, and you can access our free draft guide. We've surpassed 100 pages, so make sure to click there. We have a lot of different player profiles that you need to know about as a Chicago Bears fan. But what's going on, everybody? It is a beautiful day out here in the Midwest, and today we're going to be talking about doing an old school mock draft. So old school mock draft, because we haven't done a mock draft in a while. We're going to go back to an old school mock draft, a Mel Kiper-esque mock draft. So what does that mean? Here's the rules. It means no mock draft simulators, so I'm not using any of those. I'm also predicting who will be available, and also no trade backs. So this is kind of old school. Before we had all these mock draft simulators, it was someone saying, okay, this is what I think is going to happen, and ultimately guessing on some of those players. So with this, I cannot trade back. And I think that makes it a little bit more fun because we know that the Bears like to trade back, and we think that they will be trading back. But what I like about this exercise is it just lets us know, okay, who might be available? What if there's no suitors? What if Ryan Poles didn't want to trade back? Because I've said this before, I think he's going to trade out of the 122 spot. And there's also a lot of people like Fields Yates saying that the Bears are probably going to trade out of the number 9 spot. But even then, I just want us to kind of go through it as a very basic way to kind of say, hey, what are our Chicago Bears going to do if they end up staying pat at each one of these spots? So without further ado, let's get into it. I don't have my draft sound like I do on our live shows, so we're just going to get started with the number 1 pick. Because with the number 1 pick, the Chicago Bears select Caleb Williams. We're not going to go anything crazy about this. We've talked about this plenty enough. Caleb Williams out of USC. Everything that's been going on, it points to him being a stud at the quarterback position. He is the number 1 overall prospect. He's the number 1 quarterback and also has been the number 1 quarterback for quite some time. And I remember seeing he's graded as an elite quarterback all 3 of his seasons that he's been playing. He's going to be a Bears quarterback. He's only talked to the Bears. The Bears have only had 1 quarterback actually visit. It's Caleb Williams. It's as simple as that. And I'll probably pre-record a Caleb Williams draft video for the actual draft just to kind of give a good deep dive into Caleb Williams because we've all heard it. We've all heard the stuff, but I want to do a deeper dive. He's got the arm. He's got everything that you need. Caleb Williams with the number 1 overall pick. So now let's talk about pick number 9 because this is where it gets interesting. Because this sets up the entire NFL draft because if the Bears cannot get out of that number 9 pick, now we can't say, oh, let's just draft this person in the second. Let's just draft this extra person because that number 9 pick, if they stay there, it's the same with like if they were to draft Rome Odunze or a defensive lineman. If they stay there, it becomes a little bit more difficult for Ryan Poles to kind of maneuver around the draft. So let's talk about this number 9 pick because I want to at least just show my prediction. And I kind of purposely wanted it to be almost like a doomsday bad case scenario for the Bears because I feel we all know that Rome Odunze it feels like Rome Odunze will be the Bears pick if he's available. Seems like the Bears love him. Same thing with like a Malik Neighbors. It feels like they would go wide receiver because of the connection and also just to kind of make it no questions asked, you put the best wide receivers around Caleb Williams. But in my mock draft, I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, well, Caleb Williams goes to the Bears. Everything points to the Commanders taking Jaden Daniels, which I think is a big mistake. And then Drake May to the Patriots. But also, the Drake May to the Patriots, I don't think it's as slam dunk as people think. I still feel like they might even just go wide receiver. I don't think it's as slam dunk as that. But then I just feel like why would the Vikings want to move up for a quarterback like that high? I just don't see it. Ultimately, I'm saying Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver, goes number 4 to the Cardinals. Number 5, this is also where, too, I actually have Rome Odunze going to the Chargers, just because I think they like to run the football. They want a bigger wide receiver that can handle the blocking assignments. That's what Rome Odunze does. And also they need some wide receivers on that team since they got rid of all their good wide receivers. I have Rome Odunze going to the Chargers. So that leaves the Giants going Malik Neighbors. I still feel like they haven't. I would still be shocked if they completely gave up on Daniel Jones. I'm going Malik Neighbors, the next best wide receiver out there. Tennessee Titans have to go with Joe Alt. That is like everyone's favorite spot to put him besides the Chargers. And last but not least, Dallas Turner going to the Atlanta Falcons. And Dallas Turner going to the Falcons, it seems like if they were to go with a defensive lineman, it's going to be Dallas Turner. And someone showed this where Raheem Morris likes to play his defensive lineman in coverage. Out of the top 3, Dallas Turner is the one that has played the most coverage snaps out of the top 3, the Latu, Jared Verse, and Dallas Turner. Also, I am curious if they would go corner. And another piece that I want to just bring up out of this whole scenario is that rumor has it that the Jacksonville Jaguars might actually want to try and jump some people and go after a Rome Odunze just to get a top-tier wide receiver in that building. So we have the wide receivers are all gone. We have Dallas Turner all gone. So what are our options at that pick? And to me, I think it's really just 2 individual people that really stand out head over heels out of any of these other players. I think for those that are fans of the show, Byron Murphy II is, to me, someone that I think that the Bears would absolutely love, that Flus would absolutely love. He is, we say this time and time again, he is just in my opinion, he is the best defensive tackle in this class. I think that he's better than Johnny Newton. I think Newton is a tremendous hand fighter, but I think Byron Murphy has such a good floor to his game, and he's got such a high ceiling to his game as well, just with his pure explosiveness. And that's the thing that, yes, the Bears invested highly in some defensive tackles last year, but I think Byron Murphy, if the Bears want him, if Flus falls in love with Byron Murphy, he's the pick. Now, at this point of recording, he has not talked to the Bears in a top 30 visit. Now, there's not a lot of defensive tackles that have taken top 30 visits for the Bears as well, which kind of is a little suspicious because it goes, okay, well, is it just because you feel comfortable? They still need an extra defensive tackle to play inside of their rotation. And that's where maybe Byron Murphy, who is at the Senior Bowl, could be someone that the Bears ultimately look at. But the other player that I think the Bears would be looking at in this situation is Jared Verse. I saw someone on Twitter say this. They're like, there's no more Flusian defensive end than Jared Verse. And that's exactly what I think too, where Jared Verse, 21.8% pass rush win rate, 6.6% run win rate. Now he's not this complete run stuffer. Now, all these defensive ends, I feel like they aren't a true set the edge in the run game. They kind of struggle with that. But Jared Verse is just a high motor power guy. And actually, he plays on the opposite side of Montez Sweat. So it's actually low key. It's a perfect fit in that type of an element. And that's why I think Jared Verse, the Bears might be looking at this going, this is our dude. This is the guy that we got to go after. And also, another piece that I want to just kind of throw into it, Jared Verse, I think about the Bears might really like Jared Verse, and he seems like a very safe player. He's been my defensive end 2 for literally 2 years now, or he was my defensive 2 last year. He's my defensive end 1 this year. I just think that he's such a sound, fundamentally just good player. Now, he struggles a little bit with finesse, but he's still a good player. But the reason why I want to talk about the defensive tackle position first is because within this mock draft, we're comparing the two. I like the defensive tackle prospects in the second round, like Chris Jenkins, Tavondre Sweat, Braden Fisk. Now, Tavondre Sweat got a DUI, and he might go later, and we're already projecting. I was already saying I think he's going to go in the third round. Now he might go later because there was questions about his partying. He actually talked to teams about, hey, I party too much in college. I enjoy college a lot. I need to kind of cut that out of my life. And then he gets a DUI. Not a good look for him. But the reason why I bring up the depth of defensive tackles, the Bears like players that have high ceilings and people with untapped potential. And I feel like when the Bears are looking at these later rounds, you have a Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State, very fast, might go in the second or third. Dwayne Carter, we've seen him out of Duke play very well. But you look at a lot of these day three players, Leonard Taylor III out of Miami, Mason Smith out of LSU, Mekhi Wingo out of LSU, McKinley Jackson, Tyler Davis out of Clemson. There's all these defensive tackles that have high potential ceilings. And that's where I think that unless the Bears, if Matt Eberflus looks at Byron Murphy II and goes, I need you, then he's going to be the pick. But if he goes, you know what, but there's other people down there that I still like, I think ultimately Jared Verse becomes the pick. And that's a long way for me to just say, in this mock draft, I always go Byron Murphy, but just for this, just to switch things up, I'm going to go Jared Verse. So Jared Verse is going to be the pick at number 9 for the Chicago Bears in this mock draft. So next, let's get into pick number 75 because, okay, well, we selected a defensive end in Jared Verse. Also, another little chart that I want to show is the projections of where someone might land in the third round or just where some of these top players are going. Now, these are pretty small for people that are looking out there on YouTube. You might have to expand it out. But at the defensive tackle position, in that third round, Michael Hall Jr., like we talked about, most likely is not going to be there. There is around a 30% chance that he'll be available. Ruka Rororo, I was actually kind of interested to see. A little above 40% will be there. Dwayne Carter has practically an 80% chance of being there at number 75. And Brandon Dorlus, who's a defensive tackle, defensive end, kind of hybrid, also has a very high, around 80% chance that he will be available at pick 75 as well. But then also, if we look at the defensive end spot, this is where defensive end, I think, is harder to get in these later rounds, and I don't think that there's a lot of different ends that the Bears would truly like in their system. So some of them, Brandon Dorlus, we already talked about. He's kind of that tweener, which the Bears could play him at D end or at D tackle, whichever one they'd like. But then Braylon Trice out of Washington, he has around a 30% chance to be around there at 75. Idissa Isaac, the defensive end out of Penn State, kind of around closer in that 40% range. And Marshawn Nealand is actually starting out of Western Michigan, is starting to get first round hype, believe it or not. I don't really. But anyways, he's around 20-ish% about being available at that pick number 75. So I wanted to bring that up too, just because if you're talking about who could be available, this is where drafting one of those defensive ends early could be a good benefit for the Bears, because I just think that they're not going to like a lot of these later round defensive ends. Austin Booker's one that comes to mind out of Kansas, but yet again, more of a developmental player, while some of these defensive tackles, I think that the Bears could slot into that rotation. So, at the pick number 75, who I have the Bears taking is Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon. Now, he's a very versatile player. I think ultimately he wants to play defensive end, but if I'm the Bears, I'm looking at him going, listen, you played 3 technique last year. And he's played majority of his snaps at the 3 technique, and it seems like that's where he best projects. So to me, take Dorlus out of Oregon and put him at the defensive tackle position, have him bulk up, don't have him try to slim down, because I think he's a little bit too, I think he's explosive for a defensive tackle, but he's not explosive as a defensive end, if that makes sense. So to me, I'm going Brandon Dorlus, but like I mentioned before, I think that the Bears could look at Dwayne Carter out of Duke and absolutely fall in love with him, but he might be someone you potentially get in more of that 4th round range. So we got a defensive tackle, we got a defensive end, we got a quarterback, and I already know what some of you are saying. Brad, what about the wide receivers? First off, we only have 4 draft picks. That's the problem with this. So with the fourth pick, because I know everybody and their mother wants Brendan Rice at pick 75. But there's something that's going on with Brendan Rice right now. Brendan Rice is actually falling in the draft community. Brendan Rice, and for those watching, you can see the percent chance of where he's going to be taken. And Brendan Rice has one of the largest variants that I've seen of over 70 picks. He's projected to go number 72 all the way down to pick 144. And it's just all over the place. It's literally like 1% everywhere. And part of the reason is because the profile of Brendan Rice. Because Brendan Rice out of USC, the Caleb Williams, one of his best friends, a very, very good friend of his, part of the reason he's got this weird size to him, where in the NCAA, he was very quick, very agile, kind of created some separation. Then at the Senior Bowl, he added a lot more weight and then he wasn't creating separation. He was becoming more of a jump ball player. So that's why Brendan Rice is just a kind of an enigma in a lot of the draft community, but I still like him as a potential wide receiver for the Bears. So that's where I'm actually drafting him at pick 122. And it sounds bold, but he has been plummeting. He used to be kind of like the consensus 70th player. He's all the way down to wide receiver 21, which is number 110 overall. He's been dropping. So my hope is that maybe you can get him in at that pick 122. So Brendan Rice is my selection at pick 122. I love that he's fallen. He can just keep on falling to that 4th round spot for all that I care. But the other player too, because I want to just kind of give 2 different options there as well. Someone who you know should be available there too is wide receiver out of Louisville, Jamari Thrash, who we have not talked a lot about. He's 6 foot, 188, and really his calling card to me is his footwork. He's got good long speed, but the biggest question is his hands. Reminds me a little bit of like Troy Franklin Jr., kind of the off-brand version of him that you can get in the later rounds, in rounds 4, rounds 5. He is the 140th consensus player and wide receiver 22. So he's right behind Brendan Rice in the overall wide receiver rankings. My wide receiver 23. And overall, 99th percentile in single coverage, 92nd versus zone. Last year, 62 receptions, 848 yards, 6 touchdowns. But his biggest downside, the drops. His consistent hands, it's just not there. 11.4% drop percentage. Also, I think he had like a 16% contested catch rate. And just really, it has to do with his size. He's a very slender wide receiver, and he just doesn't possess that NFL size to really kind of win at that catch point, which is what I remember a lot of, like what I'm talking about with a Franklin out of Oregon, where they're more of a deep ball player, separate and kind of try to win down the field, which you can do if you have a Keenan Allen that can win in the slot. And then you have a DJ Moore that can do anything that you ask him to. So that's where I actually think that he fits the room pretty well, because then Thrash can be more of that Tyler Lockett that takes the top off of the defense, plays more of those vertical routes, and you're not asking him to really be a physical wide receiver. Just run fast and try and get by people and create separation, which he did decently well. He was above the 75th percentile in both separation and open target rate. So ultimately, with this old school mock draft where we couldn't trade any of the picks, we walk away with Caleb Williams, Jared Verse, Brendan Dorless, and Jamari Thrash. Jamari Thrash or Brendan Rice, whatever you want to kind of throw out there. But I think ultimately when I see this, part of the reason why we wanted to do an exercise like this was just to truly see who could the Bears get at these different selections. And I think it's important also, when you only have 4 draft picks, to also focus on where you truly need the players. And I think when you look at what gives the Bears the most bang for their buck, it's really at that defensive line. They need defensive linemen. And because if they get more defensive linemen, now this defense, you feel, okay, now we're not just talking about a top half defense. We're talking about a top 5 defense. We're talking about if Jared Verse can really kind of rush the passer opposite Montez Sweat, you feel good about these ends for the future. And then also, if one of these D tackles can kind of hit too, you just feel good about this defense moving forward, and you can just continue to invest in Caleb Williams. But hope you enjoyed this quick little mock draft where we break down the players and not trade any of the draft picks. If you like it, make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube, and also download the podcast everywhere you get your podcasts. And with that, Unbearable Sports Podcast, we are out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad